everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are going to be discussing a patron requested topic. Specifically, we're going to be talking about how to find your own personal style of dominance. Now this is a pretty big subject area, so let's go ahead and just jump right into it. So, the first thing that we need to know when we're talking about dominant style is, what do I mean when I'm talking about the term dominant style? Well, for me, when I think about the term style, I recognize that there is no one way to do dominance in BDSM. Style can be used as a way to think about how you as an individual conduct yourself in BDSM relationships, how you present yourself to the BDSM world, and how your own individuality affects basically the way that you engage in kink. And I don't necessarily think you need to have a concrete codified style to do BDSM. That's not what I'm trying to get across in this video, but for some people it is very helpful to have an understanding of what their style looks like for when they are deciding what classes to go to, figuring out what types of relationships they want to engage in, and all of those sorts of things. So I just really want to encourage people before I get too far into this to remember that this isn't something you need to have figured out or even really need to have at all. It's more of just a helpful tool for some guided self-discovery of why you may enjoy doing BDSM and how you can communicate that to others in an effective manner. And in that vein, I think the first thing that you can think about when you're evaluating what your personal style might look like is, what does dominance mean to you? What does dominance look like? Because again, this is not something that everybody agrees on. Is it something that you consider to be an art form, a discipline, a refined skill set, a philosophy, an ethical code, a moral code? How do you conceive of what dominance is to you? Because even within that list, you can kind of tell right away, somebody who considers dominance to be an art form is probably going to approach that stylistically very differently from somebody who considers it to be a discipline. And going along the same path, I think the next thing to consider is, what are the things that make BDSM worthwhile to you? What are you primarily looking for in a relationship? The things that I would consider to be the hard yeses. What are the things you really want to have present in your BDSM relationship? Or how do you in general want the relationship to take form? So this would be things like considering, do you want a monogamous relationship or a polyamorous relationship? Are you looking for a long-term romantic partner? Are you looking primarily to train people and then eventually release them to have long-term partnerships with others? Are you looking for a situation that's sexual or non-sexual, romantic or non-romantic? Are there any particular fetish needs that you have? Are you looking to emphasize one particular type of play? Are you looking to emphasize rules and DS? Are you looking to emphasize a more nurturing caretaker role? There are a million different directions you could take this in, but even just kind of understanding the very basics of the type of relationship you want to have, the level of power exchange you want to engage in, can again help sort of inform what your style might look like. Another tool that you can use to help figure out what your style of dominance is would be to look at archetypes. There are a million one different archetypes that you can look at when it comes to different styles and types of dominance, but some common ones would include things like the rebel cowboy, the daddy, the military CO, the police officer, the suave wealthy dom, the untouchable dominatrix, the goddess, the mommy, the brat tamer, the C-suite executive, the Gorian master, the Victorian gentleman, the vampire lord, the primal predator, the sadist, the princess, or maybe even the 1950s head of household. Again, there are a lot, and definitely more than I can list here. But does anything on that list really speak to you? Are you intrigued by any of the terms that you hear in that list? Is there anything that you might want to look further into? The beauty of archetypes is that while they represent a general idea or general concept of what something is, it's not an absolute guide on how to be that thing. Somebody can interpret the 1950s head of household in many different ways. It doesn't have to be masculine or feminine. And for that matter, anything that I've listed here can be used in a gender neutral way. It can be used by female identified, male identified, identified as nothing, identified as both, any gender combination, any sexuality for that matter as well, can use these terms as a way to describe their dominant style. It's more a tool for you to look at, say, the Vampire Lord and say, what about that speaks to me? When I think about my style of dominance and when I look at that term, what is embodied in that I identify with, and how can I act that out in my dominance, and how can I use that as a tool to form how I act and how I might want to conduct myself in a BDSM relationship. And going beyond just archetypes, you can also look at representations in media for people who exhibit dominant behaviors. Think Irene Adler from Sherlock. Now, the trouble with this is that I don't necessarily recommend going out and looking at a specific person, like say Bane from the Batman series, and going, I want to be that as a dominant. Because most of the dominant characters that you will see in media are not dominants in a BDSM sense. They're dominant in the fact that they can control a room, they have dominant mannerisms, they have dominant ways of presenting themselves, of controlling the scenes that they are in. And I would recommend looking at them for that, looking at how they conduct themselves in the framework of like whatever piece of media they're in, not literally replicating their actions, but taking cues for maybe how the actor delivers lines or what they say, how they position themselves, how they dress, those sorts of things, and just taking those little nuggets, not necessarily taking the whole kit and caboodle, because again, most of these people that you're going to see as dominant figures are not dominant in the BDSM sense, but can still give you some tips of how you might be able to conduct yourself when it comes to interacting with, say, a submissive in a scene in order to be able to maintain control or give off a particular air, a particular style of dominance. But luckily, we also don't have to rely on archetypes and media representations to figure out what it can look like to be dominant. Now, I know not everybody will have access to this, but if you can, going to things like munches, going to BDSM parties and dungeons are a great way of learning from other real life dominants. You don't necessarily have to get buddy-buddy with every dominant you meet, but even just simply observing people, how they conduct themselves in a scene, how they dress, how they walk, how they talk, how they do aftercare, how they interact with their submissive partners. All of those things can be very informative, so you actually know what real life dominants act like. And this kind of goes back to the trouble with looking at media figures for guidance on how to be dominant or how to cultivate a dominant style, because part of cultivating a dominant style is also knowing when it needs to be on and when it needs to be off. Most of us are not going to be in 24/7 BDSM relationships where we are dominant with everybody all of the time in all situations. And part of watching how dominants conduct themselves in a public setting is to not only learn how they act with submissives, but also how to interact with others in a respectful and cordial way. Learn how you are expected to interact with people in your local community, how you talk to dungeon monitors, how you socialize with other dominant identified people. Because I think that dominants sometimes, unfortunately, are under this self-imposed pressure to just figure everything out on their own, that they are somehow supposed to like enwrap themselves in this little like chrysalis, and when they emerge into a beautiful dominant butterfly, they suddenly have all of their dominant things all figured out. But that's not really how it is. And going and watching people, learning how they talk and act and all of these things can be really helpful for informing how you want to behave as a dominant yourself. And it can be really inspiring and open you up to things you may not have considered before. If you're thinking in the abstract about, say, the daddy archetype, and you're thinking, that'd be gross, I don't want to do that, and then suddenly you go to the dungeon and you meet somebody who is acting as a daddy in a way that really speaks to you, you may end up with a very different impression about what you want to be your dominant style, and a different impression about what it means to be daddy, what the possibilities for that are. So it's also a way of just, in general, expanding your understanding of the possibilities of what dominance can be. And if you can, finding a dominant mentor is a very powerful tool to have as a new dominant who isn't quite sure what they want yet. There's a little bit of a slippery slope here where if you find certain mentors, there may be people out there who try to steer you in the one true way BDSM direction and try to teach you this is the way that all BDSM is for all people, and I would be a little bit reluctant about that. But if you are interested in maybe finding a mentor that you can look up to and whose style you're interested in replicating, I have a whole video about mentorship in BDSM which I think will be really helpful for you, and you can find a link to that down in the description below. Finally, in terms of finding inspirations for your style, if you're not able to go out into the actual real-life community, interact with people, we luckily have an entire internet out there where we have a lot more kink representation than we used to. There are websites like FetLife and even places like Instagram and Twitter where you can find real-life dominant people to interact with. And this kind of has a disadvantage of oftentimes on social media, you are only really seeing the glamorous parts, but particularly if you go to websites like FetLife, there are discussion groups, there are support networks, places where you can ask questions, where you will probably get a wide variety of answers. So if you are struggling in one particular area, or you're wondering how to cultivate a certain style of dominance, there are great resources where you can ask real-life kinksters and hopefully get some more interaction that if you can't get in real life, you can at least get online. Alright, now we've discussed some ways that you might potentially be able to find your style. How do you actually start forming your style of dominance? For me, the first place I would start is physical appearance. Yes, physical appearance is not everything, but it is often the first impression you will give to somebody who's a potential play partner, a potential submissive, or to just other people in the community. And it also affects how you think about yourself. How do you act differently when you're in a pair of sweats versus a three-piece suit? Clothing, unfortunately, does matter, and especially if you want to cultivate something that is maybe a little bit more fantastical, a little bit more role play focused, having something that looks the part can be really important to engaging in the correct headspace during a scene, and finding partners who are also interested in that same style of role play, and just in general for yourself feeling confident and feeling like you are engaging with yourself honestly about what you want your dominance to be. Because if you have your dominant style in your head as being a vampire lord, but you're over here in a pair of sweats, that disconnect can make it difficult to, unless your vampire lord happens to be somebody who wears sweats, which can totally be a thing, the disconnect can make it more difficult to conduct yourself in a way that portrays confidence. Now, you don't necessarily need to convert your whole wardrobe into something that is focused around a particular dominant style, but at the same time, it can again be a way to quickly engage in your dominant headspace and to communicate to others what type of dominance you might like to engage in. Even just having a few little simple items in your wardrobe can be really important, like say your favorite corset, or a pair of really tall heels, or a pair of vintage restored leather boots. Even just having these little symbols can be really helpful in accessing the particular style and headspace that you want to get into. Some examples of this would be, say, the 1950s head of household mixed with a little bit of daddy. maybe in that regard, you would want to have a sweater vest and some dress pants, some old Oxfords that have been restored to pristine condition, and a pair of horn-rimmed glasses. Maybe you're the more of a Victorian gentleman type, in which case you might want to go down to Etsy and see if there's anybody who is making some Victorian reproduction clothing that you can wear. Or maybe you're a little bit more on the steampunk side of things, and maybe having a little bit more of a Vampire the Masquerade type flair to your outfit is what you're looking for. Or maybe you're really into the Tom of Finland look, in which case Mr. S. Leather is going to give you exactly the kind of look that you want. And in regards to that, I think it's really important to remember that you should be making headspaces and styles work for you rather than working for a particular style or a particular headspace. If you are somebody who wants to engage in, say, maybe the military CO type of style of conducting yourself in BDSM, but you find dress pants to be really stifling and really not fun, you're the dominant. You get to make the rules. Maybe you're the type of military CO that doesn't ever wear their dress uniform. You can make that happen. It is, again, it's about making the headspace work for you, not working to fit yourself into a particular label simply because you assume that's what it has to be. Now, besides personal style, it is also important to think about mannerisms and speech. Like I said before, confidence is key when it comes to being dominant and having others take you seriously in the scene. A dominant who portrays a lack of confidence or seems to be unsure of themselves is like the plague to submissives. And I don't say that to be offensive. I'm saying that to be like serious, like as a submissive myself. If I'm interacting with somebody who tells me they're dominant, but their body language, the way that they talk to me, if that portrays a lack of confidence, that sets off my personal alarm bells. And the reason for that is because if you are portraying a lack of confidence, that could result in negative outcomes for the scene. So it's like, why is this person not confident? Do they not really know what they're talking about? Are they lying about their level of experience? Or do they not really know how to use the types of toys that they're saying they know about? You know, those sorts of things are what come into my head. So if you can, I wouldn't necessarily say fake it till you make it, but at least work on portraying confidence. That can be really helpful. Thankfully, though, there are ways that you can actually mentally control how you hold yourself and how you speak to almost trick yourself into therefore behaving more confidently. Psychology is really weird, and it's a very fascinating subject. But if you are conducting yourself in a way that you believe is confident, it will just make you seem more confident. It's super weird. And if you have the clothing that makes you feel confident, makes you feel like you are being the person you want to be, and then you couple that with things like, say, good posture, that is one way that you can instantly get into a more confident frame of mind. And having good posture sucks, trust me. It's something that I am working on myself. If you are a femme-identified person or you just enjoy the idea, there are corsets you can wear for support. Not necessarily saying that I intrinsically endorse corset use on like a 24/7 basis or anything like that, but a lot of people find that corsetry does elevate their headspace, does help them get into a dominant frame of mind. You can even do it with rope bondage too, which is fun, especially if you are a more bondage focused person. Helps you practice a little bit there. Something else you can do is practice like good table manners, like if you are going to a munch or a slosh or somewhere where you're eating food with others. If you are conducting yourself in a way that is mindful of others, mindful of the people around you, that can also give off good signals. And I would also recommend you remember your please and thank yous, even to submissives. Now, I'm sure there are still corners of the BDSM community out there, but at least back in the day, it used to be like submissives were not to speak until spoken to, and it was not expected that you would thank them because they were just there in the background. But these days, in most communities, particularly if you are on the TNG or the under 35 side of things, most people are going to expect that you say please and thank you to people, even submissives, who are doing a kindness towards you, like getting you a glass of water or extra napkins or something like that. If you are demonstrating in a vanilla setting that you respect people and that you're willing to use your words with somebody, that can give a good indication to somebody that, oh, this person is in general respectful, so that makes me maybe more confident about approaching them for doing a scene. Because if you are not respectful, if you are not listening to others, if you are not, saying pleases and thank yous when it would be socially expected for you to do so, that might give a bad impression about the way you might respect somebody in a scene if you can't even bother to say thank you when they get you a glass of water. Now, the most complicated part of finding your dominant style is exactly how you want your relationships to go. What is the style of the relationship? And honestly, this one is the hardest part to give advice on because it does depend so much as well, not only what you want as a dominant, but what your potential partner is like. Because there, again, I mentioned this previously, there should be at least a little bit of flexibility in there to accommodate for what the submissive expects out of relationship, because rarely you will find somebody who fits your own mold perfectly, and it's important to leave at least a little bit of wiggle room to make sure everybody's having their needs met. Some of the things that I would ask myself if I was the dominant and I was trying to find my style about what I would want from a relationship would be things like, are we going to have a contract? What is that contract going to look like? Is this something that's going to be online? Is it going to be printed on paper? Is it going to be hung up in a prominent part of the office? What type of titles are we going to be using? How frequently are we going to be using those titles with each other? How often are we going to be seeing each other? Do I want a live-in submissive? Do I want somebody who can visit me on the weekends? And then going back to those hard yes questions. What are things you need to have in a relationship? Non-monogamy, monogamy. Do you want to have a high level of power exchange, a low level of power exchange? Do you want romance? Do you want sex? All of those sorts of things stylistically can inform how you decide to have your BDSM relationship. Another thing that you can think about is what type of energy you want to have in a relationship. And this one is also really vague, but I think in general, different styles of BDSM exude different types of energy or just have different types of energy to them. Like, for example, I would say that a relationship that is based primarily on CNC has a very different energy from a relationship that is primarily based on service, unless those two are somehow combined. Just in general, think about kind of like, what is the atmosphere you want to have in the relationship? What kind of connection do you want to have to the submissive? Do you want it to be close and cuddly? Do you want it to be cold and distant? Do you want it to be impersonal? Do you want it to be friendly? Think about those sorts of ways that you would want to interact with your potential submissive. And then when you've gotten all of these different elements together, when you have figured out, how do you want to dress, how do you want to act, what type of relationship you want to have, then over time, I think you can start to maybe codify that little bit more into a style of dominance. There's somebody who's been on my channel before and whose videos I recommend named Master Arcane, and he has a particular style of dominance that he teaches to others, which is romantic BDSM. And that is a way that you can have a style of dominance. I think of that less of a personal style and more of a school of thought about how to conduct BDSM, almost sort of like a philosophy of BDSM, if you will. And not every style of BDSM has to be codified into something that you can teach others and proselytize to others. Not to say that this is a bad thing. Many people have BDSM houses where multiple people all share the same framework, understanding of how to conduct themselves in BDSM relationships, but that is not, I think, the path that all dominant styles should take, and nor should it be, I think, where you're starting from. I think if you're looking at a dominant style with the hopes to come up with something that's as codified, as rigid as something as Master Arcane's presentation of it, I think that's something that just develops over time. That develops after having multiple relationships with submissives, over having experience about understanding where the trials and the errors are. Because until you get to practice this in real life, where you are looking at, oh, okay, so here's this idea that I had, but here's how it doesn't work, or here's how we had to overcome this certain pitfall, you can't really know about those things in a way where you can come up with like a code of conduct until you have experience with those things happening and how you overcome or prevent certain hurdles from being an issue. Anyways, I think that is pretty much all I had to say for this video. Again, I do just really want to quickly emphasize that you don't need to have a style of dominance in order to be a dominant, but it is helpful for some people to have a more concrete way of thinking about how they approach BDSM, and these are just some of the tools you can use to go down that path. And as well, again, you don't need to have something that's like codified, written down. Here is my system for how I engage in BDSM, because I don't really think you can get to that point until you have had at least some experience, and you can use that experience to help you form that, but it doesn't come first. It doesn't come at the beginning. Only once you have experience do you really have the knowledge you need in order to come up with a codified practice of like, when I intake a submissive, first we do this, and then we work on this training, and then on Monday mornings we do this, and then on Tuesday mornings we do this. Like, it takes knowing the individual you're engaging in BDSM with, combined with experience and combined with just trial and error to really get to that point. But anyways, I'm belaboring the point. Hopefully this was helpful. If you have any other comments or questions, please let me know. Hopefully you found this helpful. Unfortunately, I am not a dominant myself, so there is a little bit of a limited capacity in terms of how much I can help answer this question, but I do recommend Master Arcane's channel if you are looking for somebody who does have it figured out in terms of a codified BDSM style. I would recommend you look at his materials. That's pretty much it for today. All resources, everything else is going to be in the description box below. If you like this video and you haven't already, please do subscribe. I make videos twice a week. And finally, if you did enjoy this video, please consider supporting me on Patreon. That is how I'm able to make these videos possible. And until I see you guys next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.